When a stranger appeared in his locked apartment and changed his life forever, David never imagined she had been dead for 5 years. David sat at his computer desk, staring at the blank screen that had been mocking him for the past 3 hours. The cursor blinked steadily like a heartbeat that reminded him of all the work he hadn't done. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he kept taking sips anyway, hoping the bitter taste might somehow spark his creativity. Outside his small apartment window, rain drummed against the glass in a steady rhythm. The city lights below blurred into colorful streaks through the water droplets. It was well past midnight and most of his neighbors had gone to sleep hours ago. But David couldn't sleep. Not when he had this important project due in just 2 days. He was a graphic designer, and usually ideas came to him easily. But lately, everything felt forced and flat. Every design he created looked like something he'd seen 1,000 times before. Nothing felt fresh or exciting. His boss had been patient so far, but David knew that patience was running thin. The apartment felt smaller tonight than usual. The walls seemed to press in around him, and the silence was broken only by the rain and the quiet hum of his computer. He lived alone, and most nights he enjoyed the peace. But tonight the loneliness felt heavy, like a blanket that was too warm but impossible to throw off. David pushed back from his desk and walked to the kitchen. Maybe some water would help clear his head. As he filled his glass, he heard something that made him freeze, the sound of his front door opening. At first he thought he might have imagined it. The old building made all sorts of noises, especially on rainy nights like this. But then he heard it again. The unmistakable creak of his front door, followed by the soft sound of footsteps in his hallway. His heart started beating faster. He was certain he had locked that door. He always locked it. David set down his glass carefully, trying not to make any noise. Maybe it was his neighbor from across the hall. Sometimes Mrs. Chen got confused and tried the wrong door. But these footsteps sounded different, lighter, more purposeful. The footsteps were getting closer, moving down the short hallway toward his bedroom. David grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, his hands shaking slightly. He wasn't a violent person, but he needed something to protect himself. What if this was a burglar? What if someone dangerous had broken into his home? He crept toward the hallway, his bare feet silent on the cold floor. The footsteps had stopped, but he could sense someone was there. The air itself felt different, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. David took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway. That's when he saw her. A woman stood in the doorway of his bedroom, and she was unlike anyone he had ever seen. She wasn't particularly tall, but something about the way she carried herself made her seem larger than life. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders, and her eyes seemed to sparkle even in the dim light from his computer screen. But what shocked David most was her confidence. She didn't look like someone who had just broken into an apartment. She didn't look nervous or scared or guilty. Instead, she looked like she belonged there, like this was the most natural thing in the world. Without saying a word, she began removing her coat. It was a long, elegant coat that must have been expensive. She hung it carefully on the back of his bedroom chair, as if she had done this 100 times before. David watched, frozen, as she continued removing her outer clothes. A scarf, gloves, a sweater. Each item was placed neatly, deliberately, and then she laughed. It was a soft sound, barely more than a breath, but it filled the entire apartment. It wasn't a cruel laugh or a crazy laugh. It was the kind of laugh someone makes when they're genuinely amused by something delightful. Like she was enjoying a private joke that only she understood. David finally found his voice. "Who are you?" he whispered, still clutching the kitchen knife. "How did you get in here?" The woman turned to look at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were warm and intelligent, and when she smiled, David felt his grip on the knife loosen without him meaning to. "Hello, David," she said, and her voice was like music. "I've been wanting to meet you for such a long time." "You know my name?" David's mind was racing. "Do I know you? Are you from the building?" She laughed again, that same soft, mysterious sound. "In a way," she said. "I live very close by." David looked at her more carefully. She was beautiful, but in an unusual, Way. Her features were striking rather than perfect, and there was something timeless about her face. She could have been 25 or 35 or even older. It was impossible to tell. I don't understand, David said. My door was locked. I always lock my door. Locks, she said, waving her hand dismissively, are for people who don't really want to connect. She moved around his bedroom like she had been there many times before. She looked at his drawings on the wall, touched the books on his nightstand, examined the half-finished project still glowing on his computer screen. Everything she did seemed natural and unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. You're an artist, she said, though it wasn't really a question. I'm a graphic designer, David corrected automatically. Same thing, she replied, picking up one of his sketchbooks and flipping through it gently. You create beauty where there was none before. You take ideas and make them visible. That's what artists do. David watched her examine his work, feeling strangely vulnerable. These sketches were personal, things he had never shown anyone. But she looked at them with such genuine interest and appreciation that he found himself wanting to know what she thought. You've been struggling lately, she observed, still looking at his drawings. It wasn't a question, but David nodded anyway. How did you know? She looked up at him and smiled again. I can see it in your work, and I can see it in you. The rain outside seemed to be getting heavier, creating a cozy cocoon around the apartment. The strange fear David had felt when he first heard the footsteps was beginning to fade, replaced by curiosity and an odd sense of comfort. What's your name? He asked. She closed the sketchbook carefully and set it back where she had found it. Then she looked at him with those mysterious, sparkling eyes. Elena, she said simply, and then she laughed softly once more, as if the whole situation was exactly as it should be. The next morning, David woke up wondering if the whole thing had been a dream. The sunlight streaming through his window made everything seem normal again. He looked around his bedroom, half expecting to see Elena's coat still hanging on his chair, but it was gone, and there was no sign that anyone else had ever been there. He got up and made coffee, trying to remember exactly what had happened. Had he really met a mysterious woman named Elena? Or had he fallen asleep at his desk and dreamed the whole thing? The more he thought about it, the less real it seemed. But then, as he was getting ready for work, he heard a soft knock at his door. David's heart jumped. He looked through the peephole and saw Elena standing in the hallway, looking as calm and confident as she had the night before. She was wearing different clothes now, a simple blue dress that somehow looked elegant on her. David opened the door, still not quite believing what he was seeing. You're real, he said. Elena smiled. Good morning to you too, David. I thought I might have dreamed you, he admitted, stepping aside to let her in. Dreams and reality aren't always as different as people think, she said, walking into his apartment like she belonged there. Did you sleep well? Actually, yes, David realized with surprise. Better than I have in weeks. Elena nodded as if this was exactly what she had expected. Sometimes all we need is a little change in our routine. She moved to his kitchen and began making herself comfortable, opening cabinets and looking through his coffee supplies. Do you mind if I make us some coffee? I make it differently than most people. David watched, fascinated, as Elena worked. She moved with such grace and purpose, like every action was part of a dance. The coffee she made smelled incredible, rich and warm with hints of spices he couldn't identify. Where did you learn to make coffee like this? David asked, taking a sip. It was the best coffee he had ever tasted. I've traveled quite a bit, Elena said, settling into the chair across from him. You pick up things along the way. What kind of traveling? Elena's eyes took on a distant look. Oh, all kinds. Sometimes for work, sometimes just because a place called to me. I've never been very good at staying in one spot for too long. But you said you live close by? I do, she said, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she changed the subject. Tell me about your work, David. What kind of designs do you create? David found himself talking more openly than he had in months. He told Elena about his projects, his struggles with creativity, his dreams of doing more meaningful work. She listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions and making comments that showed she truly understood what he was trying to say. "You know what I think?" Elena said when he finished talking. "I think you're afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of being truly creative. Afraid of putting your real self into your work." David felt defensive at first, but then he realized she might be right. "It's not that simple," he said. "I have bills to pay. I can't just create whatever I want." "Can't you?" Elena asked. "Who says you can't do both? Who says meaningful work can't also pay the bills?" She got up and walked over to his computer, looking at the project he had been struggling with the night before. "This is safe," she observed. "It's exactly what everyone expects. But where are you in this design, David? Where is your voice?" David looked at his work with fresh eyes. Elena was right. It was safe, boring, forgettable. "I don't know how to put myself into it," he admitted. "That's because you're thinking too much," Elena said. "Art isn't something you think your way through. It's something you feel your way through." She sat down at his desk and opened a new document. "Show me something you would create if you knew no one would judge it. If you knew it couldn't fail." David hesitated. "I don't know if I can just—" "Don't think," Elena interrupted, gently. "Just start." Something about her presence made David feel braver than usual. He sat down next to her and began working, letting his hands move without his mind getting in the way. Colors flowed across the screen, shapes emerged and transformed, and before he knew it, he had created something unlike anything he had ever made before. It was bold and emotional and completely personal. It was scary and exciting at the same time. "There," Elena said, her voice full of approval. "There you are." David stared at what he had created, amazed. "I didn't know I could do that." "You always could," Elena said. "You just needed someone to remind you." She stood up and walked toward the door. "I should let you get to work." "Wait," David called out. "Will I see you again?" Elena turned back and gave him that mysterious smile. "What do you think?" "I hope so," David said honestly. "Then you will," she replied. After she left, David spent the rest of the day working on his project with an energy and enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. The work flowed easily, and everything he touched seemed to turn out better than he had expected. By evening, he had completed something he was genuinely proud of. As he saved his work, David realized that Elena had never told him which apartment she lived in. She had said she lived close by, but the building wasn't that big. How had he never seen her before? And how had she gotten into his apartment last night? But as he looked at the beautiful design on his screen, work that was truly his own, David decided that maybe some questions didn't need immediate answers. Maybe some mysteries were meant to unfold slowly. That night, he went to bed early for the first time in months, and he dreamed of colors and shapes and soft laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Over the next few days, Elena began visiting David regularly, though never at times he expected. Sometimes she would be there when he woke up, making that incredible coffee in his kitchen. Other times she would appear in the evening, just as he was finishing work for the day. Each time she came, David felt his world expanding a little bit more. Elena had a way of seeing possibilities where he saw only problems. She encouraged him to take risks with his designs, to submit his work to galleries and competitions he had never considered before. "What's the worst that could happen?" she would ask when David expressed doubt. "They could reject me," David would answer. "And then what?" "And then, I guess I'd be exactly where I am now." "Exactly," Elena would say with that knowing smile. "But what if they don't reject you? What if they love your work?" Under Elena's influence, David began submitting his designs to places he had never dared approach before. To his amazement, several galleries expressed interest in his work. A small magazine wanted to feature one of his pieces. A local business asked him to create a logo that was completely different from his usual corporate style. David's confidence grew with each small success, and his work became bolder and more personal. He started a series of designs inspired by his conversations with Elena, capturing the feelings she brought out in him: curiosity, courage, wonder. But the more time David spent with Elena, the more he noticed things that didn't quite add up. She never seemed to eat anything, though she was always happy to cook for him. He never saw her check a phone or receive any messages. When he offered to walk her home, she always declined, saying she preferred to go alone. One evening, David decided to test something. "Elena," he said, "I'd love to see your apartment sometime. You've been so kind to me, I'd like to return the favor." Elena's smile flickered for just a moment. "My place isn't very interesting," she said. "I'm still settling in." "How long have you lived in the building?" "Time has a way of blurring together," Elena said, which wasn't really an answer at all. David tried a different approach. "Which apartment number are you?" "4B, Elena replied without hesitation. David knew apartment 4B. He had lived in this building for 3 years, and 4B had been empty the entire time. He had asked the landlord about renting it when his lease was up for renewal, and the landlord had said it wasn't available. A chill ran down David's spine, but he tried to keep his voice casual. "Oh, 4B. I thought that apartment was vacant." Elena looked at him directly, and for a moment her expression was unreadable. Then she laughed, that same soft, mysterious laugh from their first meeting. "Vacant," she repeated, as if the word amused her. "I suppose it depends on how you define vacant." "What do you mean?" But Elena was already moving toward the door. "I should go," she said. "You have work to do tomorrow." "Elena, wait." She turned back to him, and her expression was kind but firm. "David, does it really matter where I live? Does it matter how I got here or why I came? What matters is what we're creating together." She was right, David realized. Since Elena had entered his life, everything had gotten better. His work was improving, his confidence was growing, and he felt more alive than he had in years. Whatever Elena was, whatever her story was, she was helping him become the person he had always wanted to be. "You're right," David said. "It doesn't matter." Elena's smile returned, warm and approving. "Good night, David." "Good night, Elena." After she left, David walked over to his window and looked out at the building across the courtyard. He could see apartment 4B from his window. The lights were off, just as they had been every night for the past 3 years. But as David watched, he thought he saw a shadow move across the window, just for a moment, like someone passing by. Then the window was dark again. David closed his curtains and went to bed, deciding that some mysteries. The next few weeks brought changes David never could have imagined. His portfolio was accepted by 3 different galleries, and his client work had taken on a new level of creativity that impressed everyone who saw it. But along with the success came growing questions about Elena that he couldn't ignore. David started paying closer attention to the details. When Elena made coffee, she never drank any herself. When she cooked dinner, she would sit with him while he ate, but her plate always remained untouched. She would smile and say she had eaten earlier, or that she wasn't hungry. But David began to notice the pattern. He also realized that Elena never seemed to sleep. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting by his window, looking out at the city with that peaceful expression she always wore. When he asked if she was okay, she would just smile and say she liked watching the world while it rested. "Don't you ever get tired?" David asked one morning after, finding her awake again. "Tired is a state of mind," Elena replied, which was the kind of answer she often gave that sounded wise but didn't really explain anything. David decided he needed to understand what was happening. The next day, while Elena was out, he went to speak with his landlord, Mr. Peterson. The old man had managed the building for over 20 years and knew everything about every tenant. "Mr. Peterson," David said, finding him in the lobby checking the mailboxes. I wanted to ask about apartment 4B. 4B? Mr. Peterson looked puzzled. That apartment's been empty for months. Why? Are you interested in moving? No, I just thought. I saw someone moving in there recently. A woman named Elena. Mr. Peterson shook his head firmly. No new tenants in 4B. Haven't had anyone there since the previous tenant moved out last spring. Strange unit, that one. People never seem to stay. Long. David felt a cold feeling in his stomach. What do you mean, strange? Oh, just little things. Tenants always complained about weird noises or feeling like someone was watching them. Probably just old building settling, but you know how people get spooked. Mr. Peterson laughed. Why? You haven't been hearing anything, have you? No, David lied. Just curious. That evening, David waited for Elena to arrive, his mind spinning with questions. When she appeared at his door, as she always did, looking beautiful and serene, David decided he had to know the truth. Elena, he said as she settled into her usual chair, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. I'm always honest with you, David, she replied, though there was something cautious in her voice now. I spoke with Mr. Peterson today. He says apartment 4B is empty, has been empty for months. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, but it was different from her usual smile, sadder somehow. And what do you think that means, she asked. I don't know, David admitted. That's what I'm asking you. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the building across the courtyard. David, do you remember what your life was like before I came here? The question caught David off guard. What does that have to do with... Just answer me, please. David thought about it. I was stuck, uninspired, lonely. My work was terrible, and I didn't see any way to change it. And now? Now everything is different, better. David felt a growing sense of unease. Elena, what are you trying to tell me? She turned back to face him, and in the dim light she looked almost transparent. I'm trying to tell you that sometimes the most important question isn't where someone comes from, but why they came. I don't understand. Elena walked back to him and sat down, taking his hands in hers. Her touch felt cool, like morning air. David, 5 years ago, there was an accident. A woman named Elena Vasquez was driving home from her art studio late one night. It was raining, just like the night we met. Her car skidded off the road. David's heart began beating faster. What happened to her? She died, Elena said simply. But she had so much left to create, so much left to give. And sometimes, when the need is great enough, when someone's potential is strong enough, things find a way to continue. David stared at her, trying to process what she was telling him. Are you saying you're... I'm saying I'm exactly who I've always been, Elena replied. Someone who believes in the power of art to transform lives. Someone who saw your potential and wanted to help you find it. David pulled his hands away, standing up quickly. This is impossible. You can't be dead. You're sitting right here. We've been talking for weeks. You've been helping me, and I still am helping you, Elena said calmly. Does knowing this change what we've accomplished together? David paced around his apartment, his mind racing. But how is this possible? How can you be here if you're... Does it matter how? Elena asked. David, look at what you've created. Look at how you've grown. Look at the confidence you've found. That's all real. That happened because you were ready for it to happen. David stopped pacing and looked at his computer where his latest design was still open. It was beautiful work, the best he had ever done. He looked at the gallery acceptance letters on his desk, the positive feedback from clients, the evidence of his transformation. But if you're not really here, he said slowly, then what does that make me? It makes you someone who was open to inspiration, Elena replied, someone who was ready to believe in possibilities beyond what he could see. David sat down heavily in his chair. Am I losing my mind? Elena laughed, and it was the same soft, warm sound he had grown to love. David, sanity is overrated. What? Matters is that you're creating, you're growing, you're becoming who you were meant to be. She stood up and moved toward the door. I should go now. Wait, David called out, panic rising in his chest. Will I see you again? Elena paused at the door and looked back at him. That depends. On what? On whether you still need me. And then she was gone, leaving David alone with questions that felt too big for his apartment to hold. David didn't sleep that night. He sat at his computer, staring at his work and trying to make sense of everything Elena had told him. Was he really talking to someone who had died 5 years ago? Or was his mind creating an elaborate fantasy to cope with his loneliness and creative struggles? The next morning, he did something he had never done before. He went to the local library and looked up newspaper archives from 5 years ago. It took him an hour of searching, but finally, he found it. The headline read, "Local artist dies in a late-night accident." Below it was a photograph of a woman who looked exactly like Elena. The article described her as a talented sculptor who had been working late in her studio when the accident occurred. It mentioned her upcoming art show, her passion for helping other artists, and how much the local art community would miss her. David stared at the photograph for a long time. It was definitely Elena. The same face, the same warm eyes, the same mysterious smile. According to the article, she had died on March 15th, exactly 5 years ago. March 15th was the day David had moved into his apartment. David printed the article and took it home, his hands shaking slightly. That evening, he waited for Elena to appear. When she did, arriving just as the sun was setting, David showed her the newspaper clipping. "So it's true," he said. Elena looked at the article without surprise. "Yes, it's true." "But how is this possible? How can you be here?" Elena sat down across from him, looking more solid and real than ever. "David, do you believe that energy can be created or destroyed?" "In physics, no, it can only change forms." "Exactly. The energy that made me who I was, my creativity, my passion for helping others, my love of art, that energy didn't disappear when my body died. It just found a new way to exist." David studied her face. "But why me? Why did you come to me?" "Because you needed what I had to offer, and I needed someone to share it with. You were ready, David. Ready to grow, ready to take risks, ready to become the artist you were meant to be. And now?" Elena smiled. "Now you don't need me anymore. You've found your own confidence, your own voice. The inspiration I gave you has become part of who you are." David felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "What happens now?" "Now you continue creating. You keep taking risks. You remember that art is about connection, connecting with yourself, with others, with possibilities you never imagined." Elena stood up, and David could swear she looked slightly less solid than before. "This is goodbye, isn't it?" David asked. "This is thank you," Elena corrected. "Thank you for letting me help. Thank you for being brave enough to believe in something beyond what you could see." She moved toward the door but paused and looked back one more time. "David, 6 months from now, you're going to have your first solo art show. People are going to see your work and feel the same inspiration you felt when we met. And maybe, just maybe, one of them will be ready for their own transformation. How do you know?" Elena laughed softly one final time. "Because that's how art works. It passes from one person to another, creating waves of inspiration that never really end." And then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of the spiced coffee she used to make and the sound of soft laughter that seemed to come from the walls themselves. David sat alone in his apartment, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel lonely. He felt connected to his work, to his possibilities, to something larger than himself that he didn't fully understand, but no longer needed to question. 6 months later, David did indeed have his first solo art show. It was a success beyond his wildest dreams, and as he watched people viewing his work with wonder and inspiration in their eyes, he thought he heard, just for a moment, the sound of soft laughter mixing with the gallery conversations. And in the corner of his main piece, a design that captured the feeling of unexpected transformation, Careful observers might notice the subtle outline of a woman's silhouette, as if she were still there, still inspiring, still helping artists find their way home to themselves.